Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, the place where the palace walls whisper louder than headlines, and every royal glance carries the weight of history. Today, we unravel a storm brewing behind gilded doors, one that pits brother against brother and loyalty against blood. At the center of it all, Prince Andrew, once a man of privilege and power, now a figure wrapped in scandal and exile, daring to make a return that shakes the very foundations of the monarchy. What happened when he confronted King Charles in person is the kind of story that will leave you breathless. On a grey morning, Windsor Castle stood as it always had, a fortress of tradition, stone and silence. But inside, a drama was unfolding that even its centuries-old walls could scarcely contain. Prince Andrew arrived not as the confident figure he once was, but as a man stripped of the sheen that once defined him. Gone were the uniforms, the medals, the charm that had commanded attention. In their place stood desperation, plain and raw. His eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights, his footsteps heavy with years of disgrace. Whispers rippled down corridors as he passed. Staff stiffened, courtiers exchanged looks. For many, his very presence was a shock, a ghost from a past they thought firmly locked away. But Andrew wasn't here to apologize. He wasn't here for quiet reconciliation. No, he had come to demand. In a chamber thick with history, under the portraits of monarchs past, Andrew faced his brother. King Charles sat steady, shoulders weighted not just by his crown, but by the future of the monarchy itself. Andrew's words came sharp, cutting through the silence. He declared his birthright. His demand for reinstatement was not coated in humility, but wrapped in entitlement. He spoke of injustice, of exile undeserved, of a monarchy that had cast him aside too harshly. Witnesses later swore the air itself grew heavy. The audacity hung like smoke, suffocating in its boldness. Charles did not immediately respond. His face was unreadable, calm, measured, almost carved in stone. But beneath that stillness simmered something volcanic. When Charles finally spoke, the mask shattered. Years of restraint fell away, replaced by a torrent of fury so raw it stunned even seasoned courtiers. He reminded Andrew, in words that struck like hammers, of the scandals that had dragged the monarchy into the mud. He laid bare the disgrace that had fractured public trust, the wounds that still throbbed in the nation's memory. "You will never return to tarnish what I have rebuilt," Charles declared, his voice echoing with centuries of royal authority. Those present described it as a moment unlike any they had ever witnessed. Not a family argument, but an execution of hope. Andrew, once so proud, was left pale, his arrogance stripped away by the sheer force of his brother's rage. What made this confrontation so powerful wasn't just the words exchanged. It was what they represented. For Charles, this wasn't merely about one brother's plea. It was about survival, the monarchy's survival. He had spent his reign carefully rebuilding trust, brick by brick, leaning on the steady image of William and Catherine to guide the institution into modern times. Andrew's demand threatened all of it. His scandals were not a shadow that could be ignored. They were a wound that had nearly bled the crown dry. To let him return would be to reopen that wound before it had healed. And Charles, for the first time in front of his courtiers, made his allegiance clear. Blood ties would no longer outweigh duty. Though absent from the confrontation, William and Catherine's influence loomed larger than any words Andrew spoke. Their steady hands, their public dignity, their ability to carry both tradition and modernity, had already redefined the monarchy's image. Courtiers whispered later that William made his stance known in private. Andrew's return would undo years of progress. His words weren't fiery, but firm, the voice of destiny. Catherine's conviction was even sharper. For her, this wasn't about protocol. It was about the legacy she and William would pass on to their children. She was determined that George, Charlotte, and Louis would inherit a crown cleansed of scandal, not dragged through it. Together, the couple's presence became the silent wall Andrew could never scale. The rejection cut deep. For Andrew, returning to palace life wasn't about duty. It was about survival. His fortune had dwindled, his reputation lay in ruins, and the grandeur he once knew had been replaced by empty halls and echoes of former glory. Now, with Charles's fury still ringing in his ears, Andrew's desperation hardened into something darker. Allies began to retreat. Old friends grew silent. And yet, he refused to fade quietly into the shadows. In his solitude, he plotted, whispered, reached out to those still willing to listen. He began spinning tales of injustice, painting himself as the victim of Catherine's influence, the pawn of a brother obsessed with image. And as whispers turned to leaks, the press began to stir. That moment at Windsor was not the end, but the beginning. Andrew's rejection would ignite a campaign of whispers, leaks, and plots that threatened to drag the monarchy back into scandal. But standing in his way were not just the king's decrees, but the unshakable loyalty of William and Catherine, the couple already crowned in the hearts of the people. Stay with us, because in part 2, we'll uncover how Andrew's last desperate gambles backfired spectacularly, and how Charles sealed the future of the monarchy in a gesture that echoed across generations. From the shadows of his estate, Andrew began feeding stories to select journalists. Letters surfaced, laced with bitterness, hinting at conspiracies, at Catherine's influence, at Charles's betrayal. For a moment, some headlines stirred sympathy, but the public's patience had long expired. Instead of rallying support, his campaign backfired. People saw not a prince fighting injustice, but a man clinging desperately to a title already lost. While Andrew schemed, Catherine shone. Every public appearance, every word she spoke reinforced her image as the monarchy's steadying force. Crowds gathered not out of duty, but admiration. Parents pointed her out to their children as an example of dignity. The contrast was devastating. Where Andrew's name stirred whispers of scandal, Catherine's presence drew cheers. And in that contrast, Andrew was erased. Charles didn't need to respond to Andrew's schemes with more fury. Instead, he wielded silence as his weapon. In speeches, ceremonies, and subtle gestures, he elevated William and Catherine, deliberately omitting Andrew's name. Every word of praise for his son and daughter-in-law was another nail in Andrew's coffin. Then came the moment that symbolized everything. At a public engagement, children rushed forward to Catherine, waving flags and clutching her hand. The image spread like wildfire, a nation's future embracing its queen in waiting. Commentators called it the people's coronation. William and Catherine had not yet worn the crown, but they had already become the monarchy's heart. Alone, isolated, and stripped of allies, Andrew faded into a ghost haunting the edges of royal life. His whispers no longer stirred headlines. His name no longer carried weight. He had been written out of the monarchy's story. And in his absence, Charles's loyalty to William and Catherine crystallized. William was entrusted with duties once reserved for kings. Catherine was handed jewels that carried Diana's legacy. Symbolic, deliberate acts that made their role undeniable. With these gestures, Charles drew a line in history. The monarchy's future would not be built on broken branches, but on strong roots. William and Catherine were already crowned in the hearts of the people, the shield of the monarchy's survival. Andrew's downfall was complete. His exile wasn't just personal, it was historical. The monarchy had moved on, and his place in it was gone forever. So, was Charles's decision his greatest act of loyalty, or his final betrayal of family? One thing is certain, the crown's survival has been sealed in William and Catherine, while Andrew has been left as little more than a shadow of what once was. News of the confrontation spread quickly through the palace, though no official word was released. Staff whispered in corridors, careful not to be overheard, but unable to contain the tension. One aide later confessed that the very air inside Windsor felt different after Andrew's explosive demand, heavier, brittle, as if every chandelier above their heads might come crashing down. It wasn't just about two brothers fighting. It was about the monarchy itself, about whether one scandal-scarred man could unravel years of painstaking restoration. Humiliated by Charles's thunderous rejection, Andrew's bitterness curdled into obsession. He replayed the confrontation endlessly in his mind. Why, he fumed, was William treated like the golden heir while he, born of the same royal blood, was left to rot in exile? Friends noticed the change. The once jovial prince now sat alone for hours, staring into the distance, mumbling about betrayal. At dinner parties, he would veer into tirades about Catherine, blaming her elegance, her growing popularity, her iron will hidden behind soft smiles. She has poisoned him against me, he allegedly muttered one evening, sending shivers through those within earshot. When whispers of Andrew's return attempt reached the press, tabloids seized the story like wolves circling prey. Headlines screamed of brotherly betrayal at Windsor, and Andrew's shocking plea to Charles. But the public's reaction was merciless. Comment sections and radio call-ins bristled with outrage. How dare Andrew even consider clawing his way back? For many, the memory of his scandals was not distant, it was a scar, still raw. Meanwhile, Catherine's recent engagements provided the perfect counterbalance. Photos of her gently comforting a shy child, laughing with hospital patients, or walking hand in hand with William stood in stark, devastating contrast to Andrew's shadowy return. The monarchy wasn't just surviving without Andrew, it was thriving. Yet behind his public fury, Charles wrestled privately with the personal cost of his decision. He was, after all, a brother before he was a king. Family dinners were already fractured, holidays tense, and every memory of their shared childhood now tinged with bitterness. Some close advisors revealed that Charles spent long evenings in his study afterward, pacing, sighing, his shoulders slumped. He carried the guilt of knowing he had shut the door on his brother forever. But he also carried the conviction that he had no choice. As one confidant put it, Charles believes the survival of the crown outweighs the survival of any single bond of brotherhood. For William, Andrew's demand was more than a scandal, it was a direct threat to his future. He knew that public trust in the monarchy was fragile, and a single wrong move could shatter it. Behind closed doors, William told Charles bluntly that if Andrew were ever allowed back, years of effort would unravel in days. He reminded his father that the public looked not only at the crown, but at who would inherit it. And Catherine, she was crystal clear. With a calm, but steely voice, she vowed that their children's future must not be jeopardized by Andrew's selfishness. She urged Charles to think not only of the present, but of the dynasty's survival a century from now. In those moments, the alliance between Charles, William, and Catherine crystallized. Andrew was no longer just a disgraced prince, he was the enemy of the monarchy's future. In his frustration, Andrew doubled down. He reached out to sympathetic journalists, feeding them tales of palace coldness and unfair exile. He painted himself as a victim of Catherine's influence and Charles's paranoia. But the public wasn't buying it. Polls showed his popularity sinking further, even among those once sympathetic. The harder he tried to claw back relevance, the deeper he buried himself in irrelevance. His final desperate gamble came in the form of a leaked letter, a plea supposedly written to Charles, dripping with emotion, lamenting his treatment. But instead of stirring compassion, it only sparked ridicule. Late-night hosts mocked it. Newspapers shredded it. One commentator declared, "It reads less like a royal's plea and more like a desperate man clinging to ashes." While Andrew floundered, Catherine's quiet strength became the monarchy's greatest weapon. Every public appearance she made drew larger crowds. Mothers lifted daughters onto their shoulders to wave at her. Veterans bowed deeply, seeing in her the same grace once carried by the late Queen Elizabeth. The crown jewels, once draped across scandal and controversy, now shone again on Catherine's shoulders. When Charles entrusted her with wearing a family tiara during a state banquet, the symbolism was clear. She wasn't just William's wife. She was the monarchy's shield, its future queen already in the making. The real end of Andrew's campaign came not with words, but with silence. Charles never responded to his letters, never acknowledged his demands, never mentioned him in public again. Instead, he doubled down on William and Catherine. At one ceremony, Charles handed William a ceremonial roll once reserved only for heirs apparent, a moment captured by cameras, broadcast around the world, and interpreted by many as Charles saying, "The future is secure. The crown passes to them." The crowd erupted in cheers. The image went viral, and Andrew's name, for all its noise, was nowhere to be heard.